Hello, everyone. My name is Pedro, and I'm a fanatical supporter of Santos FC.
Hi Pedro, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm good. I mentioned to you a bit last time. I was so happy to hear that you're from Detroit. We spoke about it a bit, about my interest in
hmm
the city and just the history. How are things in Detroit at the moment?
They're good. They're good. I think the city, obviously, as you well know, may get a bad rap in the news, but it's really much different on the ground. There's a lot going on, whether it's artistically, lots of great restaurants going on, and as we had spoken about previously, the city's really experienced, in certain parts, not all, of course, but rejuvenation, especially in the downtown and the midtown area. There's plenty of different pockets of not only just different vibrant cultural things, but there's investment flowing into the city. So it's an exciting time. Of course, there's still that grit and that classic Midwestern Detroit feel. But overall, I think things are good. We're still weathering, the COVID pandemic, of course, but on the whole, I think that the city has fared well, and I'm pretty optimistic about the future.
My first question, how and why Santos?
Well, it's a bit of a story in a couple different steps. Essentially, the genesis is when I was a child, and like I said, I mean, I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. The really our main religions here are Christianity and ice hockey.
Mhm.
We're like Southern Canada, basically. So I grew up a big ice hockey fan. The Detroit Red Wings were really the only thing I cared about as far as like a sporting perspective. But I did spend a lot of time at my grandparents' house, and they had a book there that was like a sports encyclopedia and had all sorts of sports in it. And my grandfather was a admirer of Pele, and that's why I originally bought this book. And there was a spread in the book about what they would call Pele and Friends, which was all about the great '60s teams of Santos. And so and I probably read this book maybe 100 times. And so since I was a child, in the back of my head, I always knew Pele. I always knew Santos, if not by name, but definitely by the crest. So I always had that in my head since I was a boy. Fast forward to 2006. Again, I am completely no knowledge about what I would call at the time soccer, just absolutely zero. But I ended up having the misfortune at the time, but turned out to be fortune of breaking my foot the first day of summer going off a skateboard ramp in 2006. And now I was looking forward to this great summer outdoors. Now I'm stuck indoors. Turned out to be a blessing in disguise. I found the World Cup on TV and I became obsessed with it. I watched every match that I could. As I was telling you, I'm half Italian, so the Italians won that year, and I was just completely obsessed with it. I could not get enough. And so when it ended, I had this like void in my life, and I needed to follow club football. I just had to do it. And really, the only players that I knew were like Pele, Coutinho, all these guys from the '60s. So just in my head at the time, I said, okay, this is my club. This is the team that I'm going to support. And of course, there's no way you really can do that in 2006 in the U.S. I couldn't follow the team. The best I could do was kind of look up Wikipedia, try to get a feel. And again, at the time, I had no clue. I thought for some reason there'd be just one global league rather than different domestic leagues. No clue about Libertadores, Champions League. All I knew was that I liked this club, Santos. So unfortunately, I couldn't follow the team really, so it kind of faded away. But again, and it's funny, I was listening to the episode with Adrian from Tijuana, talking about the 2010 World Cup. And when that rolled around, again, I caught World Cup fever. And this time was a little bit different. After the World Cup, I could follow the club. Santos had done this genius move where they really invested a lot in their YouTube channel.
Mhm.
And so I was able to start following the club more on a day-to-day basis, seeing who they're playing, seeing the young stars they had at the time, and following them on YouTube, which is really more where my fandom starts, that 2010 era on. And of course, at the time, it was a very easy time to be a Santos supporter. We had all these young stars. We were successful domestically in the Copa do Brasil, in the Paulista State Championship, and then of course in 2011 the Libertadores. So that combination of accessibility and the upward momentum of the team at the time really just put me over the edge, and that's really where I where my fandom started. So sorry about the rambling story, but
No, but
that
that's what
is
makes it so
that is the
interesting.
story.
No, but that's what makes it so interesting. I like that you sort of you found a lot that resonated with you with Adrian's story in so many ways.
Mhm.
So how do you keep up with the games right now?
Well, so a few years back, I think in January it'll be 3 years. I started this Twitter account as a way to engage more with the team, and kind of dive deeper into what was once like the secret passion that I had. But I keep up to the with the day to day going on with the club and surrounding teams on Twitter mostly. Watching the game, I have a few websites that I go to for streams. I've tried the different streaming services where you would pay, and none of them really seem to be doing the job. But from my understanding, there is Paramount Plus now that
Okay.
apparently is good content and good quality. But the quality of some of these websites that we stream from is really quite good, and they have very good options. So I just keep up with them online at these websites, and it's really easy. It's really easy, and the quality is very good. So usually just via Twitter and these streaming platforms.
Yeah. Is there a lot of English content available?
There isn't, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to get on Twitter and become part of this very niche English language Brazilian football community. All the streams that I watch are normally in Portuguese, whether it's normally Brazilian Portuguese. There is a Portuguese channel from Portugal that occasionally broadcasts Brazilian league games.
Hmm.
But generally it is Portuguese. Sometimes continental competitions, especially Sudamericana, will be in Spanish. But it's kind of been a joy. I've been able to I'm only fluent in English, but I've been able to kind of decode some of the some Portuguese sometimes, from the announcers and especially on Twitter. So, and I have a small background in Spanish and Italian, other Romance languages, but but yeah, it's been kind of fun learning just a bit of Portuguese along the way.
What's the time difference like?
It's not bad, really. From my Eastern Standard Time zone in the U.S., it's only about an hour difference from Sao Paulo.
All right.
So most of the games, even if they're midweek, I can just watch after work, and then I'll have dinner afterwards, and it'll be a very nice night. I know from your perspective, in India, I know it's quite a bit different, and the time zones are quite a bit more spread apart. But I was saying that a lot of, I mean, I have such a admiration for the fans in places like Malaysia and Australia and India, just their commitment to the team, staying up late, waking up early to watch these games. It's really it's inspiring. There's a guy, a Santos fan in Norway, Andre Norwega
Oh,
is his name on Twitter, and he is a fanatical Santos supporter, and he's up till 3 a.m., 2 a.m. watching these games. And every time I see him tweet, I'm inspired, and I'm admiring his commitment to the club.
who are Santos's biggest rivals?
Ooh, that's a good question. Um, Oftentimes, I think it's hard to say. So, in the city of Sao Paulo, there are four big clubs, and Palmeiras, Corinthians, and Sao Paulo FC are the three other ones. So, I would say, I mean, each club rivalry has something special to it. For me, right now, and I think the intensity of those rivalries, it's always there, but it ebbs and flows with kind of the trajectory of each team at the time of the match. For me, especially what happened last year in the Libertadores, Palmeiras is my most hated rival right now. And I would say they're number one on my list. It could be different for each supporter, but I think one of each of those clubs is going to be, no matter what Santos supporter you talk to, one of those three clubs from Sao Paulo is going to end up being, each supporter's biggest rival. So definitely one of those three. For me, it's Palmeiras.
Who is your club legend?
Well, I mean, it's almost like we don't even have to ask the question. It's Pele, of course. Something that's just really struck me about that. Oftentimes, I'm sure you've seen these debates on Twitter, whether it's, is Messi better than Pele? Is Ronaldo better than Pele? Was Pele even that great? His goals were scored in these friendlies. What's that about? There's all this chatter on Twitter. But it's incredible. Number one, I mean, Pele as a brand, like I said, even in 2006, if I had been wearing a Pele shirt in the U.S., in the Midwest, in America, um, everyone would know who he is. And this is before the age of social media. This is before. I mean, he did this in the '60s and was, just this enormous cultural phenomenon. He's some of the goals. Well, obviously we miss them in real time, but you can see them on YouTube, are just incredible, especially for the time. He was so just a level better than everyone else at the time. And even players that had played against him that are considered greats, if you ask them, they only have one answer. Who is the best player in the world? It's always Pele. So without a question, I think Pele is the club legend, for all of us. If you're asking just from my short little window of following Santos, I think an alternative answer could be Neymar, who of course is, depending on who you ask, the second, third best player in the world right now, the most expensive player in the world right now. So if you want to just put that Pele conversation to the side, because it's so evident and so clear that he is not only just a club legend, but really the face of football. I mean, the guy that essentially coined the term "the beautiful game." If you want to just couch that conversation, I think secondarily, especially now in this day and age, I think Neymar would be a good candidate as well. But it's got to be Pele.
If you look at Messi and even Neymar for that matter,
Mm-hmm.
when you consider it, that these guys, they have never played in what is so-called considered the best league, the English league.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they're interested even. These these greats are literally in a league of their own, where you know Messi has spent his entire career at, and you never thought that he'd leave, right? In La Liga, and even for that matter, Pele.
Sure.
He never went to Europe. His only stint, if I'm not mistaken, he had a stint in New York.
Yep, with the Cosmos, correct? Yep.
Pele is a perfect example of that. I think in many ways these guys are just following in his boots.
Yeah, it is an interesting comparison to draw, especially one with like you said, Messi in La Liga, whereas obviously La Liga is no walk in the park. For a long time, I think, and this may have changed just this year, I thought the Premier League and La Liga were kind of 1 and 2, or 1A and 1B best leagues in the world, and I love that comparison because a lot of people, especially nowadays, obviously, will look at Pele's career and say, "Oh, he spent the whole time in Brazil," where I mean, even at the time, the domestic, or the national league championship wasn't really. I mean, it was a focus to be sure, but it wasn't really advanced. It was brand new. I think it started in '59, although there's tons of different structures and different competitions that had taken place nationally in Brazil before that. But what I like to remind people is that the Sao Paulo and the Rio State Championship leagues at the time they had some of the best players in the world, and they were very competitive. A lot of the teams, and a lot of the players, from those leagues would show up to the World Cup and run rings around different European teams.
Right.
So it's an interesting comparison, and I think that people really really discount the quality that was in Brazil not only at that time, but really just, I mean, even 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the teams and the players that were stayed domestically in Brazil were really a high quality. And I think that's one of the reasons Pele uh, stayed, not only for the love of the club, but he had competition. You know, he would do these tours, but they were mostly for, financial reasons for the club, playing these European sides. He he had plenty of competition, and Brazil domestically, and it shows. I mean, some of Brazil's best teams, that 1970 World Cup team, was on the back of some of Pele's greatest years, and all of those players, from my memory right now, there could be maybe one or two, but were domestic players. So I think you're absolutely right, and I think more people need to take a more granular look at the career of Pele if they feel that he's not the king of football.
And in terms of the league, how is it viewed? Do you think that its popularity has increased in the past few years, or is it increasing? Is it on its ascendancy, you'd say?
That is a good question. It's complicated.
Hmm.
I think it'll always be very popular in Brazil. It's everyone's it's what they grow up with, and of course the big European teams are gaining market share there too. But it's more of a cultural thing, and it's like almost like going to church, and almost like more religious, where you do these, you'll go to a match or you'll watch a match. um and so I think that it may be plateauing as far as popularity. Internationally, I know it's never been the most followed league in the world, and I can't say, I have a hard time putting, or really, gauging the popularity outside of Brazil, just because I'm so into it. So to me, I mean, every day I log on to Twitter, everyone's talking about it. So from my little bubble, it seems that it may have become a little bit more popular as far as the international fans. I know there'll be plenty of football hipsters that probably have their favorite team in Brazil, but it's hard to tell. One thing that I have noticed, which is interesting, is, and it goes back to speak to just the global phenomenon of Pele. There are lots of fans, of course, of Santos because of Pele, but especially in Africa.
Hmm.
I've noticed, and outside, one could think, okay, yeah, maybe Portuguese speaking Africa, Angola, Mozambique. But outside of that, I have tons of followers from Nigeria, West Africa, South Africa. Even there's a club in Cape Town called Santos Cape Town, which, I mean, it's really incredible. And I think perhaps maybe there's been a little bit of growth in interest in the Brazilian league, internationally, but it's really hard to gauge, and it's almost, I'm not sure what the point in that experiment is, because the big five are just so much bigger, and I'm starting to think that they always will be.
Both of us were talking about our love for the World Football Phone, and
Yeah.
and Tim Vickery talking about how the league itself has become a sort of a selling league. Do you see a lot of players who move to Europe?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's been a selling league for a number of years now, and it's really, this cycle of selling is enabled by reckless management and spending from these Brazilian clubs and their administrations. But just to give you a perspective, we Santos were in the Copa Libertadores final against Palmeiras, which we ultimately, unfortunately, lost just last year, 2020. And since then, 6 of our 11 starters in that match, that final match. And for anyone who doesn't know, Libertadores is basically the South American equivalent of the Champions League. 6 of those 11 players have already left the club, and that final was in January. So it's really insane, the amount of talent that gets sold. Not all of them to Europe, not all of them to big clubs. One of our key players, Diego Patuca, was sold to Kashima Antlers in Japan. But then on the flip side, our young striker Kyle George was just sold and unveiled at Juventus just this past week. So it's been painful to see all these young stars and established players going to European clubs, and it makes it even more painful, especially this year because Santos was so successful last year in Libertadores, at least, and we had these players that should have demanded big fees, but because of the desperation for money
Yeah.
compounded by the COVID pandemic crisis. I mean, we saw excellent players with high potential go for peanuts. Lucas Verissimo, probably the best defender in Brazil last year, went for like €6.5 million to Benfica, which, in my opinion, he should have commanded a fee of 15 or more. He's a bit older. I think he's 25. So perhaps you're not paying for as many years of upside. But it's really become disheartening to see so many of your players, go off to Europe and elsewhere and play. Two caveats to that, though, or positives, is the Brazilian system, the youth system, as everyone knows, is what they're known for, constantly pumps out these incredible youth talents. So yes, we've lost Lucas Verissimo, a young defender by the name of Kaique, who unfortunately I just saw today is actually going to be out for about a month. He is a fantastic prospect, and now he's going to get more game time. We lost Kyle George, but we've got this other kid, Marcos Leonardo, who's on his way up. So there's always a next man up. How successful they'll be, we don't know, but there's always going to be these high profile prospects that are going to get plenty of playing time in Brazil. And that's one of the most exciting parts of the league. And that's why I think that a lot of people, especially even if you have a primary team in Europe, you should pay attention to what's going on in Brazil and the Brazilian league, and you should watch it because not only is it exciting, it's enjoyable, but you get a first glimpse at so many of these stars of tomorrow. Another interesting part of the Brazilian transfer strategy, if you want to call it that, is oftentimes you'll get these players who leave Brazil early for money, which is totally understandable if you're coming from a really impoverished area. So I try not to judge anyone who does, but who have made their money in a place like China or the MLS or somewhere in the Gulf, and who are now returning. So we just signed, actually today, I'm super excited about, just before I was tweeting, Leo Baptistao is coming back to Brazil. He played in Wuhan, China. He has also played for Atletico Madrid, Espanyol, amongst a couple other Spanish clubs, but now he's returning to Brazil. He's made his money, and he's still a very quality player. And so you see that with other players like Renato Augusto, just came back to Corinthians. Hulk just came back to Atletico Mineiro. Diego Costa even has returned to Brazil. So it's an interesting dynamic of you're constantly shipping out these interesting players and with high, potential. But there's also this repatriation, homecoming, I'll just say, of Brazilian players coming from abroad back to Brazil. And that can be exciting too. Oftentimes they're a bit older, or sometimes maybe they haven't done as well as you thought they would. But it makes it really interesting to watch and see how they play in Brazil. Again, another player that was returned, and you see this a lot with Flamengo as well. They just signed Andreas Pereira and Kennedy, which are two players I think that they'll do well in Brazil. And there's that thin line this probably applies to many players, that they have so much technical skill and quality, and whether it's the attitude like Gabriel Barbosa, or maybe just the chances, or just lacking that little bit of quality and consistency, like I think Andres Pereira, who's a Santos fan, by the way. But I think that they'll do really well in Brazil. So I'm excited to see them, even if they're not playing for Santos.
This actually kind of leads me to my next question. Young players you're looking to see more of?
I mean, like I said, Santos has this incredible youth setup. So there's so many. But the kid that I mentioned earlier, Kaique, same name spelled differently than the winger that Manchester City bought from Fluminense. But he's this kind of awkwardly tall-looking defender who's showed flashes of brilliance last year for Santos, really playing much higher than he plays older than he is. He's got this calmness on the ball, and obviously there's a lot of work to be done. He's kind of fallen out of form recently, and now with this injury, he'll be out for about a month. But he's going to be, I think, a big piece in Santos's success in the future. And I think that he is someone that European clubs will be looking at in a couple years, if not already, to bring in. I think so. Defensively, he's a great prospect. The other kid, Marcus Leonardo, that I mentioned, is another player that is going to command a lot of interest from European clubs. He's not really a traditional number 9. He's more of a center forward, or someone who can be involved in playmaking as well. But he's got a knack for scoring goals that I think is going to be really valuable for us. So I think for right now, those two prospects are that I've seen play are really interesting. We also just signed this Venezuelan guy, Matias Lacava, who is supposed to be a really sensational prospect as well. I think he's going to start off in the under-23 team and try to work his way into the professional team. But he's someone that's really highly rated, and I think a lot of people are excited about seeing him in the Santos kit. So I think those 3 players would be players to keep tabs on. But we have, so many players throughout the youth setup that are really high, have high ceilings, and look to be headed towards promising careers.
Player or players who you feel deserve a bit more praise for their time at the club?
That's another good question. I think, it's interesting. There are so many players that I think you could say that they deserve more praise for specifically their time at the club, just because in the way they left. Oftentimes, if you leave in a way that has kind of scorned the fans, you're forever dead to them. People like Lucas Lima, who, look, I'm no fan of, Ganso as well, once a starlet of Santos. But now I think, although supporters are more split on him, as am I. But I think one player that never really he may get some credit, and was such a loyal servant to the club, and unfortunately left in not a great way, is Aruca, from that period of like 2010 to 2015. He was on a team that had so many stars, like young stars that were at the time seemed like they were the future of the national team. Of course, Neymar, who really did live up to his potential, but Ganso, like I said, Rafael Cabral in net, who had a stint at Napoli, and I think is still a really good keeper for Reading now. But also established players like, you had Alano, who had come back from Man City to join Santos, Robinho at the time as well. So I think he kind of got a bit outshone, but Aruca was such a quality player. And at the time, I wasn't able to stream these games, but during the break for COVID, or the stoppage for COVID, I went back and I watched a lot of these games in full. And he's such a good player. He's a defensive midfielder who, was kind of that engine that drove a lot of plays from deep line in the Santos area. He's also very good, off the ball, as far as positioning, and also the technical skill required to stop and strip the ball off people. And he's a part of one of the most iconic moments in Santos history, especially recent history, which is the Neymar's first goal in the Libertadores final. He has the assist on it, one of his more rare offensive contributions, but a goal that would ultimately lead to a crowning achievement for Santos. So I think he deserves a bit more praise. And like I referenced earlier, he actually left the club in some sort of legal dispute. I think it was unpaid wages. So I think that's kind of dampened some of the memories of him. But looking back and watching those games, he was a player that I thought that I wasn't as big on before. I knew the name, but I didn't realize how great of a player he was.
A game that left you disappointed and a game that left you elated.
Okay. We'll go with the disappointed. I think my answer will be pretty obvious and recent. It was last year's Copa Libertadores final against Palmeiras. It really, we had been the underdogs for the previous 3 rounds. I think Gremio was probably on paper a better team. and we won in the quarterfinals. I think Boca was probably a better team on paper, and we won in the semifinal against them. And so we had made it to this final against Palmeiras in Rio. And I remember, I blocked my whole day off. I spent, just the week leading up to it, so excited. We knew that a lot of our players would be on their way out, especially Lucas Verissimo, who had already come into an agreement with Benfica at the time. So that we knew this was going to be a last huzzah. And of course, standing in our way were our local rivals and a team that I thought, sure, yes, they're a good team. You would say that they're probably on paper better, but I knew we could beat them. And I think if you played that game 10 times, it would be an even split 5-5. And not only did it leave me disappointed because obviously we lost, but the way that we lost in added time. And also, I should preface that with the game was played in Rio, and it was hot, hot, hot. It was, just almost brutally hot, and you could see it on the pitch. It wasn't a great game. A lot of people were, saying, why am I even watching this? They had broadcast it on free TV, free to air in the UK and Portugal. And so I was really excited about, I thought that maybe this would lead to a resurgence and interest in Brazilian football. So I had such high hopes, and it didn't turn out the way. And then in not added time, but extra time, the coach at the time, Kuka, was just in a frustration, had grabbed the ball from one of the Palmeiras players when it had exited out, and I'm not sure if he threw it or he just grabbed it and kept it away from them and kicked him, or not him, kicked the ball away, but he was ejected, and a scrum occurred, and almost exactly from that scrum and the resulting throw-in after that, Palmeiras go ahead and score. And so thinking back on that, it's just such a way. And I think that had we kept our focus in the moment and not gotten too hot under the collar, I think that it could have been a different result. So just a heartbreaking way to lose, and just the quality of the game, I think overall was disappointing as well. So that would definitely be the disappointing game. A more recent but more exciting and enthusiastic game was the last game of the season in 2019. And Santos was playing Flamengo, which at the time, due to the bizarreness of the Brazilian and South American schedule, Flamengo was this obviously this powerhouse that year. They were firing on all cylinders. They had beat River in the final of the Libertadores before this game. They had won the Brazilian league. And they were flying high. Jorge Jesus was just this incredible manager. Gabriel Barbosa was firing, the former Santos product, by the way, who had previously celebrated against Santos in the prior fixture. So I was already very upset about that. But so this last game of the season, and Sampaoli was the coach. Jorge Sampaoli now manages Olympic Marseille. And we absolutely crushed Flamengo. The kings of America, this unbeatable team, and it was 4-0 final score. All our stars contributed: Sotelo, Mourinho, Pato Sanchez. So it was just an elating experience. And the best part of that, not only beating the champions, beating them so convincingly, but at the time, Sampaoli's departure wasn't set in stone. He had plenty of meetings with the administration at the time, and I had this incredible optimism, especially after that game, that he would stay. We had finished second, actually, runner-up to Flamengo that year, which I think was definitely a surprise, and I think that he had a lot to do with that. Sampaoli, I'm a fan of his coaching style, even though personally I have some questionable feelings towards him. But after that match and throughout the course of the match, I had so much optimism for the future. I thought Sampaoli would stay. I thought we would keep this team together. I thought we would challenge the next year. And of course, the next year we would go on to the Libertadores final, but achieving a pretty mediocre finish in the Brazilian league. So I think those two games were a big contrast, but I think they're my answer to the disappointing match and exciting match question.
What's the feeling about Sampaoli?
Well, it's complicated. I think people are thankful that he came and appreciative of his time at Santos because he did a lot with a little. And I think that he was dealing with an administration who, at the time, were running the club really very poorly, and who had made a bunch of big moves that did not work out, big money moves. And so I think he was in a tough spot. He wanted, a bunch of money the previous season because he wanted to compete so badly in Libertadores, and they basically said, we can't give you the money for player signings. And he said that that was it. He had previously also given assurances that he would stay. Most heartbreakingly, to these boys that would they call them like the tree boys, where they climb these trees by the Santos training ground and they watch all the players, and they had this relationship with Sampaoli, and he had invited them into the training center, and so he had told them that he would stay, and it was this big thing. But so I don't blame him too much, but I think that also he was making demands where he knew that the club wasn't going to be able to acquiesce to them. So I think he was just sending them on a fool's errand, and I think that he had every intention to leave. So it's a little bit complicated. I'm appreciative of his time at the club, and I hope that he does well with Marseille. But I think that he kind of led a lot of Santos supporters on. Shifting gears from Santos to my local club, which is Detroit City FC, or DCFC, and I had always not. I've been pretty pessimistic about football, or soccer, if you'd like to call it in this context, really becoming a top American sport, and supported by the masses. I always thought that the North American sports would win out in the end, at least in the U.S., and really only in the U.S. and Canada. But I started going to these DCFC matches, and I had mentioned to you that the attendance numbers are really incredible. And Detroit has this kind of what parts of it now are kind of hipstery, and I could kind of get the appeal of these hipsters liking the sport, and the club is very socially aware, and it kind of fits into their brand. But so all my experiences have been positive there. I love going to DCFC games. But something that really, really makes me optimistic and feeling positive about the future of the sport, especially in the U.S., is I have friends now that they couldn't tell you one player in the Premier League. They couldn't tell you one team in La Liga. They've never heard of Santos FC. They probably know Pele, but they don't know the club. But they're inviting me to go to these games, and it's become such an enjoyable, social event, and they're getting more into the team. And I think, and they're buying merchandise. They're, commenting on, goals and things like this. So I think every time I go to a DCFC match, it's something extremely positive. But I think just the way that not only like the traditional support base for that club has been, but the way they've been able to bring in more and more people excited about not only the club and the event, but the sport. So I think anytime I go to a DCFC match, I have a good time and a positive outlook.
That's great. So you're essentially, with your context of world football, and you're now watching this community being built for DCFC. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's been exciting, and they were only just founded in 2012 too. So they're a relatively new league, and the lower leagues in the U.S., despite the consistency of the MLS, there's lots of turmoil, especially below, the second level on the so-called pyramid. But it's been incredible watching them navigate these stormy waters, and doing so with grace and success too. They're a really good team. So it's really interesting to see the club being built, the fan base being built, and success on the pitch being built.
You mentioned to me that you tried to become a shareholder as well.
Yeah. They had a crowdfunding event in at the height of the pandemic, I think, Might have even been, no, it must have been during the pandemic. And as someone who wanted to support the club, I I wanted to invest and I wanted to buy a number of shares, and they had a a crowdsourced campaign to do so, to keep operations going during this pandemic. And unfortunately, they were actually oversubscribed, so they had all the money they needed, and unfortunately, I was on the outside looking in. But I did try, and if at all, I would love to be part of a football club in the future, because I think it's so exciting, and to have some skin in the game, I think is something that would be enjoyable and exciting. I'm a big kit person. I like shirts. I like kits. But the issue with me is I oftentimes I don't I really only wear them if I'm going to a DCFC match or any sort of football match, playing football with my friends just casually. I don't wear them out and about. So oftentimes I have a hard time justifying buying these expensive things. But I had this prized possession that I've unfortunately now lost. On the back of that 2006 World Cup, I had this blue uh, Italian 2006 World Cup, the real one too, that I had gotten from my parents as a birthday present, and I was elated. I wore it until I didn't fit, and then after that, I had it hanging up in my room. But unfortunately, it's since been lost to the sands of time. But I think that was something that I was intensely proud of, and loved quite a bit. I also have behind me here a 2014-2015 Neymar jersey, the home Barcelona, which has it's a cool kit to have. I like just the aesthetic. I thought it was the last, or one of I'm not a big fan of Barca's kits this year, the previous year, the year before. I thought this one was outstanding. It's so simple. The color tones on it are great, and of course they won the treble that year, so it's incredibly special as a kit standalone. For me, it's even more special because it's Neymar, who is a great idol of Santos, and following his departure from Santos, I followed him quite closely at Barcelona, and love to see him success. And I wish that MSN trio had a couple more years together, just because I think that was one of the most incredible tridents that I've seen in my time following football. But so that is something that I cherish. It's in a glass case for all those listening. And also, I'm wearing the black alternate Santos kit right now. It's got the number 10, Pele's number, but it's Soteldo kit. So, and Soteldo is one of my favorite players and one of the most exciting players that we've had come through recently. So this is one that I really like, and I think those three are really the my three favorite. I do have some other kits lying around, a scarf or two, but on the whole, I'm more of a kit guy, and these three are my favorite.
You were telling me that you had a stint abroad as well, studying
Yeah. Oh
in
yeah.
the now infamous Wuhan.
Yeah. Yeah. So in 2016, I studied abroad in China, and as a part of that, we studied in Wuhan, like you said, now infamous, at Wuhan University, and had a great time. And it was something super enjoyable, and it's just something that I think everyone should if it's feasible, travel outside their country and see the world. But we were talking about earlier, my obsession with football obviously followed me over the Pacific, and I became really interested in football culture in China and Hong Kong and Singapore, both of which I traveled to after my study abroad. And it's interesting seeing the culture in China, where basketball is much more of a popular sport. Everyone was in class. It was funny. All the Chinese kids would sit in the back because we had mixed classes, all in English, but we had Chinese students with us. But they would be streaming the NBA finals, which are on at the time. Um, but they really enjoyed. We played basketball with them a few times, and we played football with them as well. They enjoyed playing it. They didn't follow it as much, But you know, it was just a really interesting time to see all these football culture, how it translates. Also, just on Wuhan and football, Leo Baptistao, who we just signed this morning, came over from. He was playing for Wuhan FC, which is another interesting tie in there. But I was telling you that one of the most interesting places that I saw football culture was in Hong Kong, which is this tiny little city state, really, that has this unique football culture. They have the history of being a British colony, and so you'd think that perhaps that the game there is caught on, and it has and it hasn't, but this Hong Kong Premier League has experienced a resurgence in the past couple of years. I think the FA there are really trying to get interest in it, and it's led to players like Diego Forlan. I think the last stop after he retired was for Kitchee, which is a club at the time was a dominant club in the Hong Kong Premier League. It's really interesting to see these different football cultures, and like I said earlier, I've just become obsessed with the sport, and I love seeing it in different contexts, and studying abroad in China and traveling elsewhere. So this allowed me to see that, and it's been really cool.
We were talking about podcasts last time, and I shared interest in all these podcasts, and we were exchanging some notes on that. You mentioned that your Twitter handle was really inspired by one of these podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely, it was. I had been working a job at the time that I had a lot of on my own time, and so just working on a computer in Excel, just on my own, and I started listening to all these podcasts and became quite addicted to them. And there was one that I had found. I can't even recall how I found it, called Canary in Blue, which unfortunately has ceased to exist. But these two guys, Chase and Jimmy, were just avid fans of the Brazilian national team. And so they started this podcast, an in-depth analysis of the Seleção. And then after it kind of caught on, they started looking at the Brazilian league as well. And I loved this podcast. And I realized at the time, because I started following them on Twitter, that there was this community, this very, like I said earlier, niche community of English language Brazilian football content. And I was like, well, who better than me to become a part of that community? And so that's what I did. Yeah. So that's when and luckily there's a number of really excellent English language unofficial Twitter accounts for different Brazilian teams. And I checked, and there actually was a Santos English account, and I was like, oh well, there goes my idea. But when I looked a little bit closer, it didn't really tweet consistently, and it had been kind of neglected, I think. So I thought, well, this is my opportunity. Why don't I just start a new one? And so I did. So yeah. So you can follow me on Twitter. My name is Santos FC English. The handle is Santos FC _English. So yeah, check me out there, where I tweet also. It's a
I'll put it
Santos content.
in the
Yeah.
episode notes as well.
Yeah, great. But yeah, those two guys, Chase and Jimmy from the Canary in Blue, they shut it down. I think their personal lives were just becoming too busy. But I owe it to them. It's been something that's I've really enjoyed, and those two guys had a really great podcast, and I hope they're doing well. I'm not sure what they're up to now, but I'm sure they're successful in whatever they're doing.
And now you're considering starting a podcast as well. I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of inspiration, I mean, we were talking last time about the process and what's required, and listening to you and our chat last time has inspired me, and I took the week. Like I said, I had a busy week, but I tried to mix in some research about that. But yeah, it's something that I really would love to do, and that I want to consider. And I took your suggestion, and the gentleman whose name I've since forgotten, but hosts the solo podcast on
Puselas,
Real.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Was I might take some inspiration from him because that's a really well
Yeah,
done
he's great.
show.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, he's great.
and
Marty.
yeah, that I think is would be it's he established a structure that I think that
Yeah,
is useful for doing a solo podcast because as we were saying earlier, it's tough,
yeah,
linking up with people. And if
yeah,
you're going to
yeah,
have this podcast, you've got to have both people totally committed. There's got to be rapport. There's got both of you have had to watch. So it's an enormous time commitment. And I think the solo podcast for me right now is it's probably my only option. But yeah, you definitely inspired, and the wheels are turning in my head. So
that's great. That's great, man. I'm so glad to hear that. I look
yeah,
forward to it. And I'm
yeah,
sure that once you put it out there, you'll have people eager to come on and join you.
yeah, absolutely. And you have an open invite should this podcast get off the ground,
That's
because
great.
yeah,
I would love to. Yeah.
yeah, it would be great. And we can talk Arsenal and uh, and some of the Brazilian players that have come through the door there,
Yeah, that'll be
because
interesting. Wow, that'll be
it
nice.
would be I'm sure very interesting for all involved. And so yeah, so that's in the works.
This journey, what has it meant to you? What has it brought to your life being a Santos FC fan?
Hmm. Uh, a big, broad question. I'm not sure I have a great answer for that. Other than just lots of, just personal enjoyment. I mean, so for so long, it's kind of been, like I said earlier, this like secret passion. Not that I've been keeping it a secret, but it's just something that's a personal passion of mine that I think a lot of my friends here just wouldn't understand. And I think a lot of people have these sort of passions that they keep to themselves. But there's just it's become very fulfilling just joining this community online, and meeting people such as yourself, and having this outlet. But it's really become, just I feel so much, a part of something bigger, and that's always enjoyable. And especially these last few years where Santos has had these good runs, whether it's in Libertadores or domestically, that they've been successful and exciting players coming through. And it's just something that I can look forward to after a long day of work. It's something exciting when I'm getting, I'm watching the match. I have something to look forward to, as far as transfers or, just the news of the day. It's a welcome outlet and experience that I really enjoy.
That's a great answer, man. I think that when you put it like that, and a lot of times, I sort of have an idea. I know who
Hmm.
Santos FC is, and I know the story of Neymar and Pele and things like that. But when you hear it from somebody who is a fan,
Hmm.
you have that fan's perspective now, and that's infectious.
Yeah.
It and then you know y- now I'm interested and learning a bit more about the club, and I'm always interested in learning about different clubs in different parts of the world. So I think that what you said is so great, because it's just that, it's that common sort of interest. And now, because of your passion and the way that you've introduced it to me, um, now I'm interested to keep an eye on Santos, and discover more about the Brazilian league as best as I can, really. But that's how what I find interesting, and that's a brilliant answer, man.
Yeah, yeah. I think you distilled it a lot clearer than I did in my answer. But yeah, I think you're totally right. Yeah, and I think it is so infectious. And I think that, that's something that I was saying. I was telling you earlier that I've been listening to a number of your episodes, and now I'm kind of in the same boat as you, where I heard, Kelly Keith, I think, talking about Roma, and now I'm thinking about, okay, whoa, I want to learn about what's going on in the football culture in Uganda. Like,
Yeah,
what's going on
yeah,
there? What is it? What's the connection to Rome? Kaiser Chiefs with Adrian and Tijuana, or, the San Lorenzo in English guy who was it? I can't recall his name. William, right?
Yeah.
Who I've interacted with on Twitter, and his story, and Alex from Malaysia, and now I'm thinking, well, yeah, what's the football culture like in KL? Like, it's just, yeah, it's just a common language. It's such a cliche to say, but it's a common language, and it connects people, and there's just something fulfilling about that.
You like to travel, you mentioned.
Yep.
And you take some interesting pictures
Yep.
that have a Santos connection.
Yep. So I've just because of travel restrictions, of course, I haven't been traveling much lately. But I was lucky enough to go on a trip in 2019 or 2018 where I went to Thailand, and then I went to South Korea. And just kind of while I was packing, I thought that I just grabbed a Santos shirt that I had. And when I was there, so for a long time, I kind of wanted to keep my a level of anonymity on my account. Just I'm not sure why. Now I'm less concerned about it. But at the time, so I just grabbed a Santos shirt. I think I might have even grabbed it for like pajamas. But I just, as I was traveling there on the plane, I had an idea. Maybe I'll take a photo for my Twitter account and let everyone know that this club is truly a global club, and we're across the globe. So I ended up just taking a few pictures of the crest on the shirt with the skyline of Bangkok in the background. I did the same in Seoul in South Korea, and so now I've kind of had this relatively new trend of taking this picture of the kit in places like Miami Beach and where else? Northern Michigan, and a number of other places that I've been. And actually, interestingly, one of the sponsors of the Santos youth team is the tourism board of Thailand. So there's a number of Santos supporter accounts on Instagram, but one of them had asked me if they minded if I used this picture of the Santos crest with the Bangkok skyline in the background, and they posted it on Twitter, and the tourism sponsors actually responded and said that they loved the picture. So that was cool to see, and that's another just kind of connection that was made that I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. It really is, man. It really is.
Yeah.
It's such a simple idea, right? But it sort of represents so much to so many people all of a sudden. I love that.
Yeah. It's really cool to see, and now anytime I travel, I try to bring some piece of gear with me that has the Santos crest on it.
Pedro, thanks so much for coming on Faraway Fan. It has been an absolute pleasure learning about Santos from you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been equally fun being on, and let me know if ever you need another guest and you want to talk more Santos. I would be happy to.
Brilliant, and I look forward to the podcast, man.
And I'll probably be much sooner than that coming to you with any questions I have on the podcasting and tips, and then eventually, hopefully, a guest spot request. So keep an eye open for that.
Thanks, man.
Yep, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. Do leave us a review, and you can also find us on Twitter and Instagram @FarawayFanPod. That's Faraway Fan Pod. Thanks again.